It is late Saturday morning. You are out by the fence with a coffee cup going cold in one hand, and you do the thing you have been putting off for 3 weekends. You press your thumb into the bottom edge of a picket. It does not splinter. It does not crack. It goes soft. The board that looked gray and merely old is rotting from the bottom up, and the wood gives under your thumb like wet cardboard. Now the arithmetic starts, and it is the kind nobody wants to do on a Saturday. One soft board becomes a section. A section pulls you to the gate. The gate pulls you to the posts. And by the time you call somebody who does this for a living, the number on the estimate is not a board anymore. It is $1,900 on the low end. It is $4,000 or more on the high end. For a fence. For wood that was standing there looking fine last summer. So you do what most people do. You go to the hardware store, buy another gallon of fence stain for $43, roll it on over the damp wood, and tell yourself you bought another few years. You did not. You bought another coat of paint on top of a moisture problem, and in 2 seasons, you will be back at that same bottom rail with the same soft thumb test and a bigger number on the clipboard. Here is what nobody at the hardware store is going to mention. There is a cheap, old, documented way to deal with the biology that causes rot before the lumber gets soft enough to cost you thousands. A box of the stuff is under $7. It has been sitting in the laundry aisle your entire life. And the only reason you were never taught to use it on a fence is the plainest reason there is. Nobody gets rich teaching a homeowner how to stop feeding rot. There is a great deal of money in selling the next stain, the next board, and the next whole fence. There is no money at all in handing you something that costs less than a fast food lunch and showing you how to make it work. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what it is, how to use it, what it honestly costs, where it works, and where it does not. No fairy tales, no forever spray. Just the cheap part, the honest part, and the part that keeps $4,000 from leaving your household. I want to be straight with you before I go further. A lot of folks are trying to solve rot with one more pretty coating after the wood is already staying wet. That is backwards. You are not fixing the problem. You are painting over it, and you are paying to paint over it again every 2 or 3 years. The fence industry loves that. Coatings peel, boards soften, and pretty soon somebody writes a number on a clipboard and your Saturday turns into $4,000 you did not plan on spending. Here is what the old way understood that the new way forgot. Rot is not old age. Rot is a moisture problem with living organisms attached to it. Decay fungi need damp wood long enough to colonize. Termites and boring insects need that wood to stay vulnerable long enough to feed and nest. If you deal with the biology and the moisture before the lumber gets soft enough to price you out, you do not need the next coating, the next replacement board, or the next contractor with a clipboard. What I am going to show you today is a 2-part preservation system built around one cheap staple that most people already have under their laundry room sink. A box of borax is $6.98. Borates genuinely suppress decay fungi and wood-destroying insects. That part is real, and it has been documented for decades. But I am also going to tell you where borax stops being enough by itself, because the truth makes this method stronger, not weaker. By the end of this video, you will know exactly where borate belongs, where it does not belong alone, what to buy, what every piece costs, and how to make an outdoor fence last meaningfully longer without telling yourself fairy tales about a forever spray. I am not a chemist selling a jug. I am a 74-year-old mechanic and handyman who grew up around people who did not throw out wood just because weather had started on it. My father knew that water is what ruins most things. My mother knew a household cannot afford to buy the same lesson over and over. That is where every one of these videos comes from, not from a laboratory, from a legal pad, a kitchen table, and the kind of arithmetic that does not leave anything out. I like old methods, but I like the truth better. If an old method works, I will hand it to you. If it needs correcting for the way a fence sits out in the rain, I will tell you that too. That is the only deal I have ever made with you, and I have not broken it yet. Before I show you what to do, you need to understand why it works, because that understanding is what tells you what to expect, what not to expect, and where to draw the line. Wood rot is not aging, it is biology. Decay fungi are living organisms that colonize damp wood and feed on it. They need moisture, they need time, and they need the wood to stay unprotected long enough for them to set up. Termites and wood-boring insects work the same general territory. They are not drawn to old wood. They are drawn to vulnerable wood. And vulnerable wood is almost always wet wood that nobody dealt with. Borates work because boron compounds are toxic to many of those organisms. When borat gets into the wood fiber, it poisons the food source for fungi and makes the wood inhospitable to insects. That mechanism is real. Borat-treated wood has been used for decades in protected construction elements, in framing, in sill plates, in remedial treatment of historic buildings. The National Park Service has documented borat preservatives applied to seasoned exterior woodwork with meaningful results. Now here is the part most videos leave out, and it is the part that matters most if your fence sits outside in the weather. Borates are water-soluble. That is actually what makes them useful. They dissolve in hot water, and once dissolved, they can diffuse and travel with moisture into the wood. That is how they get in. But that same water-soluble character means they can leach back out if repeated rain or chronic wetting keeps washing the wood. The American Wood Protection Association specifies borates for interior uses for exactly that reason. Exterior cuts and exposed surfaces get a different chemistry. Oxine copper for above-ground field treatment, copper naphthenate for ground contact work. So here is what this means for you and your fence. Expect borate to help on bare absorbent wood where it can soak in and then stay reasonably protected from direct, repeated soaking. Expect it to be useful on vulnerable fence boards, on checks and cracks, on end grain, and on rehab work where you are trying to buy years of life before damage gets expensive. Do not expect a surface-only borax spray to equal pressure treatment. Do not expect it to beat constant wetting at the soil line by itself. The borate handles the bugs and the fungus. The rest of the job is making sure rain does not keep carrying that protection back out. That one honest sentence is worth more than 100 miracle claims, because now you know exactly what you are doing and why. If this kind of plain teaching is what you have been looking for, the subscribe button is right there. Every video on this channel works the same way: the real method, the real cost, and the honest limits. No hype, no selling, just the kind of knowledge that used to pass across a kitchen table. Now let me show you exactly how to do this. Here is what you need, and I will put a dollar amount on every piece of it so there is nothing hidden. 1 65-ounce box of 20 Mule Team Borax. That is $6.98 at Home Depot. That is your primary preservative for the sound, bare wood on your fence. 1 box of disposable natural gloves, about $8.47 for a pack of 50 at Walmart. 1 pair of splash-proof safety goggles, $5.98 at Lowe's. A 2-gallon hand pump sprayer, which is a tool purchase you will use again, runs about $15.76 for a basic Chapin unit. A metal pot or heat-proof bucket you already own for dissolving the borax in hot water. Those are your basics. Now, for the exterior follow-up step, where the exposure is harsher, a gallon of copper naphthenate, which is the correct exterior field treatment preservative for the wettest above-ground spots and any ground contact wood, runs about $65.95 on Amazon for a double-strength Tanino product. A penetrating exterior stain for after treatment, something like the Cabot siding and fence line, is $42.98 a gallon at Lowe's Pro Supply, and a gallon covers roughly 150 to 300 square feet depending on the wood. What to avoid? Do not pour near boiling water directly into an ordinary plastic pump sprayer. You will warp it or crack the seals. Dissolve the borax in a separate metal pot or heat-safe container, let it cool to warm, and then transfer it. Do not use borax alone on the constantly wet lower post zone or on any wood in direct ground contact. That is where copper naphthenate earns its price. And do not treat over old paint or old film-forming finish. The borat cannot get into the wood through a coating. You would just be wetting a painted surface and telling yourself you did something. Here is the step-by-step, and every step has a reason. Step 1. Triage the fence before you spend $1. Walk the entire fence line. Push a screwdriver into the bottom edges of pickets, the ends of rails, and the base of every post. Sort what you find into 3 honest piles. Salvageable dry boards that are still sound. Vulnerable but not yet failed sections, especially the lower portions that get damp, and pieces that are already soft enough to crumble or that a screwdriver pushes through without resistance. Be honest here. Borate is for prevention and early intervention, not resurrection. Anything punky enough to fail under a screwdriver gets replaced. Anything at the post line that stays chronically wet needs either copper naphthenate treatment or replacement with properly rated, pressure-treated lumber. This step costs you nothing but 15 minutes and saves you from wasting preservative on wood that is already past saving. Step 2. Strip off false protection. Scrape away any flaking film-forming coating. Clear away caked soil, vines, grass, packed leaves, and mulch piled against the base of the boards. The reason is not cosmetic. Moisture is the primary engine of biodeterioration, and organic debris holds moisture against the wood like a wet sponge that never dries. The wrong approach, the one that costs you the whole fence eventually, is coating over damp, dirty wood and calling it protection. Step 3. Mix the borax solution. Boil water in a metal pot or heat-proof bucket. Stir borax into the very hot water until no more will dissolve cleanly. The heat is for dissolving the mineral, not for theatrics. Hot water holds more borate in solution, which means more preservative delivered per application. Let it cool down to warm before you transfer it to your pump sprayer. This costs you a portion of your $6.98 box and a few minutes at the stove. Step 4. Apply only to bare, thirsty wood. Spray or brush the warm borate solution onto bare wood surfaces. Focus on end grain, checks, cracks, knot areas, the bottom foot or 2 of pickets that are still sound, and any freshly exposed repair surfaces. Saturate until the wood stops drinking quickly. Let it dry thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly, before you do anything else to it. If the wood has old finish on it, the borat cannot penetrate. This is the single detail most people get wrong. They spray over old finish and never actually get preservative into the wood. Step 5. Shift chemistry where the exposure changes. This is the critical honesty beat that makes the whole method real instead of wishful. For exposed cuts, drilled holes, and the wettest above-ground spots where rain hits repeatedly, use the exterior field treatment chemistry that the industry actually recommends, not borax alone. For ground contact zones and replacement post ends, copper naphthenate at $65.95 a gallon is the defensible choice. You can keep borax as the cheap hero for the sheltered and semi-protected wood, but you have to tell the truth about where it stops being enough. A gallon of copper naphthenate goes a long way on cut ends and post bases, so the per application cost is modest, even though the jug is not cheap. Step 6. Seal for water shedding, not for a plastic shell. After the borat-treated wood has dried completely, Follow with a penetrating exterior finish or water-repellent product suited to fences. Not a thick film that is supposed to hide all sins, but a breathable finish that helps shed water while letting the wood release moisture when it needs to. A gallon of penetrating stain at $42.98 covers 150 to 300 square feet. The National Park Service documentation on borat-treated exterior wood specifically notes that long-term success depended on periodically reapplying a water-repellent coating. The borat is the medicine. The finish is the raincoat. Step 7. Fix the moisture source that caused the trouble in the first place. Regrade the soil away from the fence boards. Trim grass off the bottoms. Pull mulch back so it is not touching pickets. Clear vines. Cap or bevel any horizontal surfaces that are holding standing water. Preservatives buy life, but drainage and airflow are what keep you from rebuying the same repair next year. This step costs nothing but labor, and it is the step that compounds every dollar you just spent on treatment. Now let me tell you where this came from, because it matters. The generation that came through the Depression understood wood as something you maintained, not something you replaced by reflex. The United States Department of Agriculture published farm timber preservation guides that documented a plain truth. Untreated fence posts that might last about 3 years could, when effectively treated with the right preservative, last 35 years or more. That is not a myth. That is a measured outcome from a culture that could not afford to lose a fence line. But I want to be careful with the history, because careful is what earns your trust. The older documented fence post world leaned heavily on creosote, pentachlorophenol, copper naphthenate, and other serious farm preservatives. Borates came into documented use later, and more specifically in protected and remedial applications. So I'm not going to tell you that Dust Bowl farmers were all out there with grocery borax in a sprayer, permanently mineralizing entire exposed fences. The honest line is this: we are recovering the old farm habit of preserving wood before it fails, and borate is one real tool in that tradition, not a magic legend that excuses bad physics. You are not learning a new method. You are recovering an old principle and applying it with the right chemistry in the right places. The preservation routine that keeps these savings compounding is simple and seasonal. Tonight, walk the fence and mark every softboard, every open check, every low spot that stays wet, and every post that stays dark after rain. This week, clean the bottoms, clear the soil line, and treat the salvageable bare wood with your borate solution. This month, replace any failed members, field treat every cut end with copper naphthenate, and get your drainage corrected. This season, apply a penetrating finish on the sound sections and make sure no weeds, mulch, or earth are holding moisture against the wood. Then once a year, walk the line again. Keep the fence dry, keep the finish breathable, and never let the ground hold wet against the boards. That is not a chore. That is how a fence stays standing while the neighbors keep replacing theirs. Now let me be honest about what this does and what it does not do, because this is where the video earns the right to exist. Strong evidence. Borates are real wood preservatives effective against decay fungi and certain wood-destroying insects when used in the right place. Farm wood preservation genuinely can multiply service life. Moisture control is the foundation of every preservation system that works. Moderate evidence, meaning it works, but it is conditional. A hot water borax treatment on exterior fence boards can be worthwhile as a low-cost remedial and preventive treatment if it is applied to bare wood that can then dry and stay reasonably protected from constant soaking. That is an evidence-backed "this helps," not a blanket "this lasts forever." Weak or unsupported, and I will say it plainly. The claim that hot water pulls borax deep into the cellular structure and leaves crystals permanently locked in for 40 years is not supported by the research I trust. The literature supports dissolution and diffusion, but also leaching under weather exposure. The American Wood Protection Association and the USDA both distinguish surface treatments from true pressure penetration. This is exactly where the video gets stronger by refusing the viral version of the story. When to call a professional or replace the wood outright. If posts are structurally soft, leaning from below grade decay, or carrying gates and loads they can no longer safely support, replacement is the answer. If the fence sits in chronic irrigation spray or constant soil contact, chemistry alone is not a real fix. If the goal is code-grade long-term outdoor durability for new construction, pressure-treated lumber in the correct use category is the proper standard. There is no shame in buying the right material for the right job. The shame is in not knowing when cheap prevention would have saved you from needing to. Safety, and I am not going to soften this. Borates are lower toxicity than many older wood preservatives, but they are not harmless household vitamins. Wear your nitrile gloves every time. Wear splash goggles when mixing and spraying. Do not breathe the dust when you are measuring and stirring the dry powder. Dissolve the borax in a separate heat-safe container and let it cool before it goes near your sprayer. Keep your runoff off garden plants and away from ponds and streams, because borates act as non-selective herbicides and will damage vegetation. Do not mix random cleaners into the same batch, and if you are using copper naphthenate for the exterior field treatment, know that it can irritate skin and eyes and is not for food contact wood or vegetable garden use. Simple precautions, take them every time. Here is where it all comes together. You have one cheap mineral preservative, borax at $6.98, that handles the biology on bare, sheltered, and semi-protected wood. You have one exterior field treatment preservative, copper naphthenate at $65.95 a gallon for the wet and exposed spots where borax alone would wash out. You have a penetrating finish at about $43 a gallon to shed water and keep the borate locked in longer. And you have moisture control, which costs nothing but your attention and a rake underneath all of it. That is the system, no single miracle product. A preservation system that works because each piece does what it actually can. The honest math is plain. The borax consumable, the emotional hero of this story, is $6.98. Add gloves at $8.47, goggles at $5.98, and a sprayer at $15.76 if you do not already own one, and your first session before any exterior chemistry is in the low 30s to about $37. Add copper naphthenate for the exposed spots and a gallon of penetrating stain, and a serious rehab session on a real fence can climb into the $70 to $150 range depending on how much fence you have and how much of it needs the stronger treatment. That is the honest first session cost. It is not $10, but line it up against what it prevents. Fence repair commonly runs $300 to $950. Full replacement runs $30 to $80 per linear foot. A professional new wood fence installation lands in the range of $1,900 to nearly $5,000. So the honest final line is not, this $10 box permanently replaces a $4,000 fence. It is this. A cheap borate first preservation routine can buy years, save sections, and keep a four-figure fence problem from arriving early. The $10 hero buys the first and biggest piece of that insurance. The system around it is what makes the promise real. There is no money in teaching this. There is a great deal of money in selling the next can of peeling fence stain, the next replacement board, the next emergency repair call, and eventually the next entire fence. Nobody had to coordinate that loss of knowledge. It was not a conspiracy. It was plainer than that. A family that knows how to keep wood dry, treat the trouble spots early, and field treat every cut end correctly does not buy nearly as many replacement boards, nearly as many coatings, or nearly as many emergency repairs. 2 generations got used to buying the next can and the next panel, and the habit of preserving wood before it failed got quiet. It did not get disproven, it got unprofitable. And unprofitable knowledge tends to sit in old farm bulletins and back issues of extension service pamphlets that nobody reprints, because there is no margin in reprinting something that saves people money. This was never really about one fence. It is about whether your property depends on the store every time weather gets at it, or whether you know how to stop small decay while it is still cheap. The people I grew up around did not have money for second fences. They had knowledge, and they had the habit of acting on it before things got expensive. That is not nostalgia. That is a way of living, owing nobody for what you can understand and do yourself, replacing less, knowing your own materials, a home that depends on you and not the store. Here is what I want you to do tonight. Walk your fence line with a screwdriver and a piece of chalk. Mark every soft board, every wet spot, every post base that stays dark. This week, clean those bases, clear the soil line, and mix your first batch of borates solution. Treat the bare, sound wood and let it dry. This month, replace the boards and posts that are already gone, field treat every cut end with copper naphthenate, and fix whatever drainage problem started the rot. This season, get a penetrating finish on the treated sections and make sure nothing is holding moisture against the wood. You are not spending thousands. You are spending a Saturday and a fraction of what one contractor visit would cost. And every month that fence stands sound is money that stays in your account instead of leaving it. Now I have 2 questions for you, and I read every single one of these. First, what part of your fence always goes first? The bottoms, the gate side, the shady side, or the posts? Write it down, because the answers teach all of us where to look before it gets expensive. And second, if your father, your grandfather, or some old farmer you knew had a way of keeping outdoor wood alive longer than it had any right to, write it down below. These little inherited methods get lost when nobody writes them down, and this is the place to keep them. If you are not subscribed yet, this is the channel where that kind of knowledge lives. Every video, same deal, the real method, the real cost, the honest limit, and a dollar amount on everything. Next time, same principle, different problem, same low-cost prevention. The cheap old method for keeping deck cuts and post ends from turning into the first place rot starts. That one is coming soon. Until then, walk the fence, treat the wood you can save, replace what you cannot, and stop feeding rot with neglect and false coatings. That is how it is still done in any home that remembers.